The number one solve that companies are looking for us to kind of give them, almost always it starts with cost. And if we can't meet the cost equation, then it's almost a conversation ender right then and there. Doesn't matter how cool your technology is, doesn't matter how secure you might purport for it to be, and all the different accreditations you might have. If you don't meet the cost structure, it's going to be prohibitive to doing business with a lot of companies.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Muneer Mirza. Muneer is the Director of End User Computing at Amazon Web Services. This is a group he founded 5 years ago, roughly. He's been with Amazon for 16 years, starting as a technical leader of Amazon's websites. He joined AWS 10 years ago and had roles of increasing responsibility, including running Amazon AppStream prior to taking on his current role. I look forward to getting his thoughts on the state of play on cloud economics, ways in which tech and digital leaders can keep the need for innovation and balance with the need to be mindful of costs and the need to keep key assets safe from cyber events, among a variety of topics I'm sure that we will cover together. Muneer, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Thank you for having me, Peter. It's great to be here. I look forward to our conversation.
I do as well. Yeah, thank you. Well, Muneer, let's talk a bit about Amazon when you began with the company. As I mentioned just a moment ago, 16 years ago, you joined Amazon. And just for context, describe the Amazon that you joined then.
Yeah, the Amazon that I joined, very different than the Amazon that exists today. It's a different company, but the values are rooted in very, very similar things. We still have our leadership principles, and we've added to them, and we've modified them over the years. But the company that I joined, was a really fascinating one. It was sort of emerging out of, I think, a couple really big cultural changes. One was there was a shift towards microservices and decoupling. Previously the original incarnation of the company was sort of this monolithic piece of software, and the company had realized that some really critical folks at the company realized that it was a bottleneck. And so we started, as we say here at Amazon, decouple a lot of our systems and our services, and we started building strong APIs between not just our services but our teams as well. And the interesting thing that happened with that cultural change that I think was rooted in a technical philosophy of decoupling microservices, you found yourself as a leader, as an engineer, as someone of importance who got to know everybody. Everybody was connected to everybody. And so you would just, in those days, you would have a phone on your desk. You would pick up the phone and call such and such and be like, hey, can you help me with XYZ? Or, say, hey, like I need to chat with you a little bit later this afternoon. And you would just meander onto their office that afternoon, and you would spend the time with them and just do stuff. And now, it's changed quite a bit. It's a bigger company. The scale is, many times greater than it was at that time. And, you're required to be a little bit more planful, a little bit more thoughtful. We focus on so many more inputs than we ever did before. And hopefully that powers the sort of progress in the business that we've built over the last few years.
Well, another new aspect of the time between then and now was the creation of AWS, part of the organization you joined a decade ago. Again, if you wouldn't mind, just again for context setting, can you describe that business when you joined?
Actually, right when I started, AWS was a nascent service, effectively on a couple floors in the building that I was in. And, now it's, I think something that, people credit for being pioneers in the tech industry. I think one of the things that's been really beautiful about working here and, contemplating our history is that it started with the premise that like you could call an API and you can achieve, some sort of infrastructure related task. Like how cool is it to like, have a queue service and say, let me call an API, and you're actually putting something on that queue. And then, hey, why doesn't that apply for a server? And so like how cool is it to say create and you get a server? You don't actually have to call such and such who works in the data center and say, give me a server that does X, Y, and Z. You just, call one of our APIs. And I think that's one of the things that's been fascinating about working in AWS is that, at that time it was about, really, really simple things that people could do to solve very, very hard problems, sort of undifferentiated heavy lifting. And I want to really stress a couple of those points, right? One is that it's very simple to get started, and The other is, it's a very, very hard problem that a lot of people don't want to deal with. So fascinating to reflect back on it. Like I said, it was just a couple floors in the building that I was in. I don't even think it was, particularly public at that time. But a lot of innovation that's happened since then. And frankly, I'm stoked to be a part of it.
Clearly, now 16 years later, still very fully a part of it. And as I mentioned at the outset, the director of end user computing at AWS. Could you take a moment to describe end user computing in your context and your role as director, please?
Of course, yes. So I'm responsible for four critical services that comprise end user computing. The first is Amazon Workspaces. This is a service that's been around for a decade now. It is our secure desktop as a service. So, you log in, your users log in, they get a secure, whether it's Windows or Ubuntu or some other flavor of Linux desktop. And that's primarily the way that they go about, either completing a task or doing their job every day. The second service that I'm a part of is AppStream 2.0. And so AppStream is, very similar. It's a secure sort of pixel streaming service, but the premise behind it is different than providing a virtual desktop for people to use every day. While it does have desktop capabilities, the idea behind AppStream is, take an application and if it used to be a desktop application, turn it into some sort of software as a service application. And we've got, customers all over the world that think very differently, not just about taking a piece of software that they vend, but if you're in an enterprise and you're looking to move towards zero trust, we have a lot of companies that are taking that approach using AppStream as well. One specific implementation of an application that we move towards software as a service or SaaS is the browser. And that's the third service that I'm a part of, and that's our Workspaces secure browser. And so, wouldn't be neat if you spend 100% of your day in the browser to not have to buy a desktop service, just buy a service that all it does is offer you a fully managed secure browser. And so with our Workspaces secure browser service, we offer fully managed Chrome. IT admins never have to worry about updating it ever again, and end users just get to access the content that they're doing in a high fidelity, high graphics, high audio, video profile. And then the last thing that I'm a part of, it's nascent, it's our Amazon Workspaces thin client. And so we actually have built a computing device. We started with the Fire TV Cube that you can buy on Amazon.com. And we said, hey, this has all the capabilities. It's streaming capabilities. It's audio video capabilities. This has all the capabilities for it to be an actual computing device with a remote computing environment. So last year in November, we launched that thing, and we've seen a lot of interest from a bunch of customers who are doing sort of contact center or task-based workloads, and that completes the portfolio, Workspaces, AppStream, secure browser, and the thin client. That's what I'm a part of.
And how different are the kinds of customers that you serve across the four different services that you noted? Are there many that operate across all or multiple? Are there a good percentage that
Yeah.
engage in one way?
No, I think that what you're finding is that there are a lot of customers who, realize like I touch a lot of different things, a lot of different elements of the portfolio of services. I'll start with one with a segment of customers that you would never think of as touching all of them, but it's our sort of independent software vendors or ISVs. It's really interesting working with these ISVs because, they think about their end users end to end, as you should, right? And so if your end user, is logging into a SaaS application that you provide, and that SaaS application may or may not have dependencies on other applications or may not be part of a suite, then you might want to provide it via AppStream, or you might want to provide a full desktop to those end users where you can copy and paste, or you can permute large pieces of data. And so, these ISVs are choosing between our workspaces and our AppStream product. And in some cases, they're using both. Now, from time to time, you want to enable your users to only access a slice of it. So you say, okay, I'm just going to make it available in the browser, and that's where the secure browser comes in. Every end user that I work with on a daily basis has a device. You and me have a device right now that we're using, and I'm sure all of the listeners to Technovation have a device that they're using to listen to this. And so that's a big part of it. And that's where the thin client comes in too. And so, we're very fortunate that we get to think about these programs end to end. It's not just, sort of one tranche of a use case. It's like, hey, what does our end users expect from us every day? And it means that we solve the problems in their entirety.
And talk a bit about, if you would, Muneer, the team you lead. When you formed this group a little less than 5 years ago, to what extent did you draw upon existing AWS talent, and where did you look for outside talent in order to build the team up?
One of the things I think that's really, really unique about Amazon, we call it our peculiar culture. And I think that there's a few key parts of that. And one is, the ability to write and express yourself in sort of written form. We're famous for doing these 6-pagers and these press releases and working backwards from the customer in that style. When you're going to build a business, you need some folks who are very familiar, very comfortable with that, because it's the way that we go about expressing ourselves to leadership. We don't rely on, gut instinct just appearing, manifesting as a revenue figure. We work really, really hard to articulate, our points of view and sort of discrete documents and in these memos. And we have to be able to express ourselves well. And so we started the team with some folks who knew how to express themselves incredibly well, sort of in Amazon's written form. As we sort of spent a little bit of time and we bootstrapped the business, the interesting thing that we found was, we were sort of going from the fire drill of the day to the next fire drill of the day. And that's tricky. We get asked questions from, what's going on with my end user device? Why did the why did the microphone stop working? All the way to, very, very complex questions around user identity and the performance or the latency of accessing our virtual desktops and our streaming applications. And so there's a huge gamut of problems that we were dealing with on a regular basis. And what we wanted was to identify some folks who are going to be able to, really synthesize all the signal from the noise with those problems and say, you know what? Here's the 4 things we need to do from the 400 things that are happening to us right now that's really going to solve our problems. And I found that there were a lot of incumbents, within the company who understood that and just had the kind of, raw smarts of taking these sort of big challenging problems of scale and scope and saying, hey, let me distill this down to like the 4 key things that you needed to work on. And as we evolved, we got better at delivering features. We got better at expressing ourselves. We watched the business grow. We learned that, we were sort of hitting a glass ceiling, if you will. We were coming up to the point where our business was, growing really, really nicely, but we felt like, hey, that there was so much more out there that we weren't even getting, access to. And as we started to kind of canvas and survey around, what we realized was, there was a little bit of sort of industry expertise and know-how that was missing. So in and around 2020, 2021, we hired a couple really, really critical leaders on our team, a couple other directors who, had significant industry experience, both in end user computing and then in storage services and ads and just in building businesses, taking it from, where we were to where we wanted to be. And that unlocked an immense number of doors. You saw so many more partnerships come out with other incumbents in end user computing. You saw the invention of a new product that's part of Workspaces. It's called Workspaces Core. There are these really nice bridges that we built from, sort of the traditional desktop as a service and virtual desktop infrastructure to moving to the cloud. And that was, in part because we brought in some folks who are like, hey, I've been doing this for 20 years, 30 years. I know how to help you take that next step. So it's a great mix. My direct reports, the folks that I work with on a daily basis, have been together for over 4 years. So there's good stability, there's good consistency in this leadership. I think when we make a commitment to a customer, you could be sure that it's going to be us that you're looking at, to realize that commitment. And I think that that's gone a really, really long way. So good balance, good stability, good strength with folks who are both here incumbent at Amazon and folks who are entrenched in our industry.
Really phenomenal. I appreciate you raising that. One of the fascinating aspects of AWS's Genesis was, in essence, finding ways to solve some of the complex computing issues associated with Amazon itself, and then by virtue of solving that, in essence, developing a business that from the inside out. And I wonder, through to today, to what extent do you remain kind of customer zero? That is Amazon itself. The extent to which your organization leverages the very tools you're talking about. Talk a bit about that relationship, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you see the enthusiasm, the sort of smile ear to ear that's coming out. So I actually feel like I was customer zero. Part of my first role at Amazon, I was in charge of a couple software teams responsible for all the traffic that came to Amazon.com and all of the web pages that got rendered. So every web page that you ever saw on Amazon.com used a piece of software that I was responsible for, my team was responsible for. And so I was on the team that first moved Amazon.com to EC2. And that was a big part of what I wanted to achieve. I was the guy that moved all of our content delivery networks from, big players that we had used towards CloudFront, as CloudFront was spinning up in AWS. And so, there were huge engineering problems, huge performance problems that we worked through sort of hand in hand. And then there were very pragmatic economic problems. Like, we think that it's all free. It's not. It's really not. Like, hey, these servers cost money. This bandwidth costs money. And so we had to think through all of that. If you were going to move your content delivery objects from one store to another, just transferring petabytes of data would cost a ton of money. And so we had to think through all of that. One of the questions that I love that we ask ourselves at Amazon when we think about innovation, when we think about the working backwards process and starting a new business, we ask ourselves, what would it take for Amazon to be a glowing reference of this project, of this software? And I'm very proud that we have over 100,000 users of workspaces here at Amazon. We use AppStream. We are evaluating our secure browser and the thin client as well. And so I feel like I get to say, not only do I work here, but I use my technology every day. In fact, I'm speaking to you right now through my workspace. And that's, a big part of what I think is very important, that we use it. But I say that not as a director of end user computing. I say that as a user of technology here at Amazon. I'm speaking to you as a customer of the end user computing team. And so that relationship, that sort of customer zero relationship, as you put it, it's really critical for us. I think, what better way to get wonderful feedback, direct, honest feedback, unfiltered, without any sort of biases, like, hey, this is going to work for me or it's not. And we're very pleased to learn that our technologies actually apply immensely for Amazon. But I do want to take to heart that, a big part of my role was to migrate Amazon.com over to AWS. And I learned a thing or two along the way with making that happen.
Super interesting. It can only make you better at what you do in your current role, especially as you advocate with a variety of customers who now are in a boat comparable to the one you were once in. Well, I'm also wondering, you and I in the past have talked about this conundrum that so many tech and digital leaders face of, on the one hand, having a mandate towards innovation, which is about risk taking, while also having
Yeah.
a mandate from a cybersecurity perspective, among others, which is about risk mitigation, and therefore kind of different vectors that need to be taken into consideration, a balance that needs to be kept. And then you add to the mix the necessity to be mindful of costs. There can be some tension across those three different prongs. And I wonder, how, as you think about the evolution of cloud services, how this is, how tech and digital leaders might manage this effectively.
The way that we approach that problem, Peter, is, we think very critically about constraints. All of my customers, in fact, that's the number one thing, those tensions that you talk about, that is the number one thing that I spend my time talking about with customers, is how do we deal with those constraints? There have been, very public security issues that have come up recently, customers not being able to even access, even get the username and password prompt. And you heard of things like major airlines becoming unavailable and hospitals becoming slowed down because the technology wasn't working on that day. You've heard of things like ransomware coming in and taking out, fairly significant oil and gas companies, meatpacking companies. And so these things have very profound effects, not just on the company and the employees and the productivity, but on the economy overall. And so, when you're sort of the CIO or CEO of a big company and you're thinking about this, you're not only thinking about how do I keep my staff up and running and how do I do what's most cost effective and in the best interest of my shareholders, you're also thinking about, listen, like, I can't afford to be on the front page, of a major publication tomorrow for not being planful enough about these constraints that I'm dealing with. I'll tell you, the number one solve that companies are looking for us to kind of give them, it starts with cost, right? Almost always it starts with cost. And it's like, listen, like, if we can't meet the cost equation, the economics of a lot of companies, then it's almost a conversation ender right then and there. It doesn't matter how cool your technology is, doesn't matter, how secure you might purport for it to be and all the different accreditations you might have. Like, listen, if you don't meet the cost structure, it's going to be prohibitive to doing business with a lot of companies, especially a lot of the larger ones. And I think that makes a lot of sense, when you're operating at scale, the numbers get really big, really fast, and you want to make sure that you're in control of that. The second thing that we find, and it's a very, very close second, is that security is something that people are willing to really, really pay for. Like, so, cost is at the top of the list, but if security isn't also like, 1A, 1B, then it's also sort of a deal ender. And I think the nice thing about working in end user computing is like that's kind of the number one thing that people come to us and look for. Is like, well, how is this going to make my staff more secure? How is this going to make my employees more productive? How is it going to make my intellectual property safer so that I don't have, whether it's bad actors or whether it's a benign situation, create disruption or cause me to lose a bunch of property? And so, that tension is something that customers are constantly looking for us to deal with. And whether it's, just saying, hey, why don't you use their secure browser so that if at the end of a session, you don't want any lingering data or lingering artifacts. Yeah, it just gets blown away. Or use some of our ephemeral desktops. Like these are the kinds of things that customers are clamoring for. They absolutely love. With our thin client, one of the really, really nice things about it is that we made it so that there's really no software that can be installed on the endpoint. Yes, it started with a Fire TV queue, but we took all the streaming media off of it, all the popular titles that you might be familiar with Amazon's Fire TV products. We said that stuff isn't at all what customers are going to be able to access. This is not about having an app store there. This is about being able to securely operate. And then you start to think a little bit, once you get past the cost and the security conversation, I think you start to think a little bit about that innovation. Right now, the thing driving a tremendous amount of innovation in our industry is artificial intelligence, whether it's generative or just straightforward ML-based stuff. And what we're finding is two things. One, people are looking to the cloud to address the compute needs that they're going to have as a result of the AI or Gen AI capabilities that they want to provide to their end users. And two is just sheer access to the different types of tools that are out there. I think, people are still figuring out their AI and Gen AI strategies, and they're like, look, like, I want to try this out. I want to figure this out in a safe way that isn't going to risk a bunch of my data and isn't going to be prohibitively expensive. And so, we're finding a lot of customers looking to us to help with that problem as well. It's a wonderful tension that you bring up. And like I said, it's the number one thing that I talk about every day with customers.
Well, you mentioned at the tail end there a topic that's certainly on the minds of a lot of tech and digital executives, AI, generally speaking, Gen AI more specifically. Yeah, I would love to hear some of your thoughts, some of the areas that excite you most in terms of the application of this, the ability currently or in the near term to add real value to tech and digital executives. What are some of the use cases you're most excited about from that perspective?
Well, I'll give you sort of what I'm really, really excited about and what I'm really interested in as a problem that I want to solve, just as as an individual who's part of this industry. What I'm most excited about is, Gen AI is going to open some doors that you probably didn't think were going to be open before. I always joke with folks, and I think the meme is, wouldn't it be great if the Gen AI could fold my laundry for me, right? And so what and how that applies to my industry, to our industry, is, what are the ways that it's going to help us interact with the physical world. And so, for example, if you're in a spot where generative AI can evaluate a lot of the usage of your, computers within an enterprise, whether it's the laptops or desktops or, even your cell phones, your mobile phones, etc., tablets if you have them, and on and on. If it could do that and it could generate some sort of recommendations as to like, listen, this is how you should be optimizing it, and then go about and implement those recommendations. And that has very practical implications, right? It has practical implications insofar as, okay, well, it looks like you just bought these computers. The latest operating system means you probably have to get rid of them. Well, you could actually switch to virtual desktops and keep all those computers, and you can capitalize that hardware over a period of time that you were expecting, as opposed to throwing it out. And oh, by the way, that has a bunch of e-waste benefits, so that you're not throwing a whole bunch of totally fine laptops into landfills and otherwise hazardous waste sort of spots. So there's a very practical application that I think generative AI is going to have on my industry in particular, insofar as being saying, hey, there's a connection with the physical world that is needed to access virtual computing, and doing more virtual computing and driving more adoption of the cloud. And so we're really, really excited about that. Someone as an individual who's super interested in technology and super interested in the way that we're going to pursue, solving big problems going forward. I'll tell you one of the ones that I think about regularly. And I think about like, what's my role insofar as helping solve this problem? And that's the ability for, sort of AI to stitch together content from a number of different sources and give you an output and say, hey, this is something that you could or couldn't do with that output. For instance, if you send me an email, and that email has, some aha moment in it, it has a breakthrough, you're really excited, you're like, hey, I've identified, these really meaningful ways to go about building our business. And then I take that, I ask Gen AI for some help, my Gen AI assistant for some help in some things. It scans that email and it's like, here's a really, really good idea, but it doesn't necessarily give Peter the attribution. And that's a big problem. That's a really, really big problem, because you want to make sure that ideas are being tied back to their owners. You want to make sure that that attribution exists, and more importantly, you want to be able to go back and start vetting, like, hey, what is the science behind this, and is the AI doing some of that? And so I want to be cautiously optimistic that there is a big, big opportunity for us to continue to advance AI throughout our companies, and at the same time that we're going to do it in a very, very safe way. And so, you started the line of questioning on asking me about these tensions. Here's that tension playing right out in front of us. Yes, it's great to innovate, and you have to be thoughtful about how.
Yeah, well articulated. I really appreciate you sharing perspectives on that. I wanted to also ask you something that really comes through the conversation, Muneer, is the extent to which you are thinking medium and long term about offerings for customers, evolution of technology. How do you remain current? What are the sources you use in order to develop new ideas, test hypotheses, look around corners in one way, shape, or form? Talk a bit about the methods you
Yeah.
use.
We like to say that like 90% of what we do here in AWS starts with the customer and works backward from that. And I'll give you a concrete example. A few years ago, we started iterating on a series of features that we call multi-region resilience. And this, came from a lot of customers who were lamenting, being in situations, whether it's disaster recovery, business continuity, or whether it's just outages. It's like, look, like, it would be really nice if AWS started thinking critically about how to help keep my users up and running productively, in the event that I am suffering an outage in one of the primary data centers that we're using, whether that's caused by the cloud, or whether that's caused by an internet service provider, or whether it's caused by some software push done by a company. Doesn't matter. What matters is my users can stay up and running as productively as we can. A lot of the sort of innovative ideas that we come up with starts with very real customer problems. and continues with, an iterative process where we sit down, we identify a number of these customers, and we say, okay, this is on paper the way that we're looking at solving this problem. And then, we'll put together a prototype for them. Then we'll put together a beta and we'll invite a number of different customers to opine and give their feedback. And then we'll think about pricing and costs. And then we'll think about, all the things that's going to be required to take this thing generally available. So, when you ask me about how we think about how I stay in touch with all the things that are happening, I would say without a doubt, it starts with the customer. And that's not just the company line. I feel like that's true in general, just listening to a bunch of thought leaders in our industry, listening to Technovation, it's cool to be a part of a community that, shares data like this, like in the way that we're sort of sharing data now. But it's equally or even more so important to pay attention to the people and the problems that they're talking about and the problems that they're saying, hey, this is impacting me. So I said 90% starts with a customer that's, expressing a problem, and we work backwards from that. The other 10% is things like, hey, every now and again, you just have this moonshot idea. And for us, the Amazon Workspace's thin client was that moonshot idea. That is an example of one of these things where we were like, look, what customers are telling us over and over is that there's this bridge between the physical world and, virtual computing. Everybody who accesses a virtual desktop needs a device. And so we're like, all right, well, can't avoid that. That's a part of how we do business every day. We got to talking to a lot of customers, and it turns out, and this was shocking to me, and this was sort of, where the light bulb went off. A lot of these devices that are managed by companies, in some cases up to 90% of them, never get returned back. So, your CIO at a company that has, say, a significant amount of seasonal workforce, and you issue them a laptop, and to think that, 10, 20, 50, 70, 90% of those laptops just get written off. And so we were like, there's a very real need for low cost, high powered, high fidelity computing device that's going to help people really, really take control. And so the innovation was taking something that already existed with the Fire TV Cube and saying, hey, we're going to give it to you as a computer that's going to satisfy a significant amount of sort of lower cost endpoint computing for you, and super secure. As I mentioned, we don't allow people to install software on it. And it gives access to a full gamut of virtual streaming applications or browser or desktops that AWS has to offer. And so it's really, really nice, every now and again to know that we've kind of created a little bit of space for that other 10% of just, hey, we got to invent something. And I think that AWS has been driven, like I said, by that 90 sort of 10 application of time.
Nice description. I appreciate that with the examples associated with each. I wanted to close, Muneer, with any recommendations you might have, anything you've recently read, watched, and or listened to that you would recommend to our audience.
A few books that I've been reading recently. The one that I'm reading right now, it's a fascinating autobiography of an individual. I'm a huge soccer fan, or for folks in the rest of the world, football fan. I'm reading an autobiography called My Turn by Johan Cruyff, and he's a fascinating guy. I think he's one of the most famous, most well-known folks in soccer. He was not only just somebody who created a tremendous amount of flair, but he was a wonderful coach. And I think that's one of the things that people don't really recognize so much or attribute so much to him. Was not only was he somebody who was exciting to watch, and there's a play on words with the name of it, My Turn. Johan Cruyff is famous for this thing called the Cruyff turn. It's a move in soccer it's a very, very fun one to pull off. But as a tactician, he was part of this program called Total Football. And why do I bring it up? Why do I bring it up in the context that we're speaking in today? One of the things about Total Football and the work that Johan Cruyff did was it sought most fundamentally to create advantages for your team on the pitch. And as a leader, as a business leader, I think that is one of the most important things that you could be asking yourself on a regular basis is, what advantages am I creating for my team to be super successful, to go out and win the situation? If you're selling something, it's like, hey, what are the advantages that I'm creating? Is it that my product is really, really whiz bang? Is that the pricing is really, really cool? Is it that I've got these people that are going to be a draw to a lot of customers? But there's going to have to be some way that you create your group, your organization, your software, whatever it is, to get that advantage to win in the moments that are super critical for you. So that's one of the things that I'm having just a blast reading right now. You caught me mid cycle in this book. I love it.
Well, a great description, and I can see why. I love the unusual connections back to your business life that you're drawing from what is an interesting read and sounds like a passion of yours otherwise of soccer as well. I appreciate you sharing that
Absolutely.
recommendation. And more generally, Muneer, I appreciate you sharing perspectives from this long and substantial tenure that you've had at Amazon, at AWS more specifically, talking a bit about the innovations that you and your team are driving, some of the conclusions you're drawing from this front row seat you have to so much innovation. I really appreciate the conversation.
It's my pleasure, Peter. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to future chats.